Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to Somewhere in the Middle with Michelle Berard. I'm your host, Michelle Berard, founder and CEO of Michelle A. Berard LLC. And I'm really happy to share this hour with you where we examine all those places where spirit meets life and the joys and challenges that may bring. You guys know I like to start by thanking Ms. Beverly Black and Tribe Family Channel for helping me create this space for us. Tribe Family Channel is home to an assortment of thought-provoking shows that explore life, spirit, business, and culture, including The Woman at the Well, hosted by Ms. Beverly Black herself. Somewhere in the Middle was born on Tribe Family Channel. And though we have grown onto our own platform, we are ever grateful and loyal to our roots. To paraphrase an African proverb, we are here only because we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. I want to thank my guest on the April 21st, 2023 show, Jason Zara, owner of Blue Moon Estate Sales, Rancho Cucamonga. You can connect with Jason on social media and at his website. If you missed that show, make sure you listen to the replay. You can find our complete show archives, including the April 21st show, at the somewhereinthemiddlepodcast.com. I also want to shout out Bruce George of the Genius is Common movement, which encourages all of us to embrace our inner genius and share it with the world. This is an essential message, and we really need to share it with the young people. But it's not just for the kids. We adults sometimes need to be reminded that the world needs our genius. Learn more about the Genius is Common movement at www.geniusiscommon.com. Now, this month's guest helps leaders grow professionally and personally so they can lead better. William Attaway is a leadership coach for Catalytic Leadership, LLC, a company he founded to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. He has served in local church ministry for over 25 years and is currently the lead pastor of Southview Community Church, a church in Herndon, Virginia, near Washington, D.C., where he has served since 2004. He holds a Ph.D. in Old Testament with an emphasis in Biblical Backgrounds and Archaeology, and he loves to read and speak about leadership, organizational change, archaeology, and building up people and teams. His newest book is Catalytic Leadership, which released in January 2022. Originally from Birmingham, Alabama, William now lives in Northern Virginia with his beautiful wife, Charlotte, and their 2 daughters. So I would like to welcome Dr. William Attaway to Somewhere in the Middle with Michelle Berard. William, thank you so much for being on the show with me.
Michelle, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I'm excited because you've got a wealth of information that you can share with the audience, and you have an interesting personal journey as well. So you probably know already, I start my interviews with 2 questions. If you're ready, I'll go ahead and ask them.
Absolutely. Fire away.
All right. So, William Attaway, who are you and how did you become who you are today?
It's a journey, that's for sure. I think I would define myself with a couple of words. First, I'm a Christ follower, and my faith is incredibly important to me. I am a husband, I'm a father, I'm a pastor, and I'm a coach and a writer.
Wow. And how'd you get to be all of those things? The first thing you mentioned was a Christ follower.
Mm-hmm.
Was that just, okay, I was born and I'm put in the church and that's it. I'm down for life. Was that it?
I did grow up going to church, but it was not personal. It was my family's faith, not mine. Went to college like so many do, and that fell away. And I met Jesus when I was 20 years old. And at that point, everything began to change, and it became my faith, not my parents and not anyone else's. And from that point, for the last nearly 30 years now, that's been a journey. Every day, learning a little bit more about what that means and leaning into that, hopefully more often than not.
Well, what does that mean for you? Like, so you're 20 years old. How did you come to meet Christ at that age? That's a time where most of us are, well, I'm not going to say most of us, but a lot of us are, we at the club, we're.
I was there. I was absolutely there. It was actually one of my roommates at the time. I was renting a house with 2 other guys to cut expenses. And one of them was a strong follower of Jesus. And he would ask me questions from time to time. And, I grew up in church. I knew the right answers. I knew what to tell him to get him off my back, so to speak. And he would listen and, okay. And then one day he said something that I'll never forget. He asked me some question that I have long since forgotten, and I gave him some totally forgettable answer. And he looked at me and he said, I think you either need to get serious about actually having faith or quit pretending like you do.
Ooh.
Right?
That's interesting.
How
did you take that?
Well, at first I was, a little ticked, like, really? Like, that's a jerk thing to say. Like, come on now. But over time, I began to think about that and realize, you know what? He's right. Often it takes somebody from outside of us to see what we don't see. It's hard to see the whole picture when you're in the frame. And that's where I was. I was in the frame. I couldn't see what I couldn't see. And what Dave did, this guy, from the outside, he saw clearly and said something to help me gain awareness of where I really was.
So where did that lead you?
Over time, it led me to a faith of my own, but it was a process. It was not a one and done. It was not a magic moment. There was no Damascus moment, so to speak. It took close to a year, really, of a lot of conversations, a lot of questions, a lot of wrestling and struggling with what that meant, what it meant for me going forward. I was working in the business world and, had a very clear target of where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. It was all about advancement and promotions and, more of that green stuff you can spend at the store. And all of a sudden, things began to shift. And that took time. It really took time for me to begin to value things differently and understand that God maybe had a different purpose for me than that. And that was a couple of years journey. So
how did that shift your perspective in business? Because you were in business, you were working, in a corporation, I'm assuming, some sort of corporation.
Yeah, that was back in the early days of cell phones. And I was in sales and, we had the brick phones and then this new flip phone that, would fold like a clamshell. The StarTAC was actually, that's funny. The StarTAC had just come out while I was working there and they ran a promotion. If you sold 10 of them, they would give you one with your name engraved on it.
Ooh. And
I thought, I want that. So I sold 11. I was like, I'm getting that. And that's so funny. So few people remember the StarTAC, but that was a part of my story, right? Over time, though, that lost the luster, of what it had once meant. It was all about the next thing and bigger, higher, faster. And all of a sudden it became different and my values and what was important to me began to shift. And I began to think more about what is it that I'm here for and how is it that God has gifted me to serve other people? I don't think there's any such thing as a wasted experience. I think God can use every experience in our lives, even the ones that we think we wish we hadn't had. What are we going to use them for, though? Right? Are we going to use them just for us? Are the experiences in our lives just for us? Or are they also for the benefit of those around us? And so these are the questions that I began to wrestle with. What is it that God wanted to do, not just in me, but through me?
So did that put you on your path to becoming a pastor?
It was a very roundabout path.
Okay.
I actually went to college initially as a pre-pharmacy major, because I had worked in a pharmacy in high school and thought that would be a great way to invest in people and serve people. I got to organic chemistry and decided that this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life, and quickly changed directions there. And that's the point at which I had dropped out and said, I want to just work for a while until I figure out what I want to do. And that's the point at which I met Jesus. And things began to shift. And I now had a different direction. So I went back to school and thought I'll work at a church because that's something that I can do to invest in people. I worked at 2 different churches and, it was a decent experience. The second one was not a great experience for me. And I saw some of the ugly underside in a lot of ways of what church can be. And I remember coming home and telling my wife, I really would rather do just about anything else than work in a church. and I took a job for the last 6 months of college, cleaning bathrooms, working in the janitorial staff, just so that I wouldn't have to continue working at a church.
Wow, that must have been a really challenging experience at that particular church.
Well, every church has its own unique challenges. And a lot of times it's a matter of a misfit between, somebody who has a different view on what church could be and should be. And that's what it was in this case. I had a different perspective on why we were there, that we're not here just for us. We're here for people who aren't here yet. Who's going to speak up for the people who aren't here yet? Who's going to speak up for the people who won't say anything? Mm-hmm. That's what I feel like God's called me to do. So I tell you all that to say that when I went to seminary, when I finished college, we moved to seminary out in Texas. I had no intention of working at a church because I had said, I'm done with that. My intent was to get a doctorate, to teach. Mm-hmm. Thought I can pour into people, invest in people that way. I love to teach. This would be fun. And that was my intent. I don't have a traditional pastor's degree, Master of Divinity. Mine's a Master of Arts. Really? Because my intent was to go and do a Ph.D., which I eventually did. Mm-hmm. But it was while I was there working at a church, but in the back office, right? Working in the tech sector. Mm-hmm. And it was there that I was invited to a conference and went and heard somebody describe the church in a way that I had never heard the church described, and painted a picture of what the church could be. And it captivated me. And here now, 25 years later, I'm still thinking about that. Still thinking, and what if we could really be the movement that Jesus started? What if we could really be the church? Not the bad part, not the stuff that's just people getting messy, right? Mm-hmm. But the movement that's about reaching people far from God, inviting them to come home. Mm-hmm. What if we were about that? What if we were about reconnecting people with their Heavenly Father and with one another? What if we were about what Jesus prayed for, being one, just like he and the Father are one?
So what does that look like to you?
It boils down to what Jesus said the night before he was crucified. He was talking to the disciples and he said, this is how people will know that you're my follower. This is how. They had grown up under the Mosaic law, 613 commands in the law of Moses. That's what they knew. Mm-hmm. And Jesus said, a new command I give you. And they're like, really? Another one? We've got 613. We don't need another one. A new command I give you, he said, love one another. By this, all people will know that you're my followers, if you love one another. And this is what the Apostle Paul would later call the law of Christ. This is the command of the new covenant, not the old covenant, not the law of Moses. That's not our covenant. Our covenant is the law of Christ, the one command. So that's what that looks like. What does it look like to love one another? What does it mean to love, even if we disagree, even if we don't think the same or act the same or vote the same, love one another. What is that? And Paul fleshes this out with so many of the one another commands that we see in the New Testament. These aren't additions to the law of Christ. These are ways to understand it. What does love one another look like? Well, it looks like forgiving one another. It looks like encouraging one another. It looks like praying for one another. It looks like bearing one another's burdens. That's what it looks like. But at its core, what does this look like? What is this picture of the movement that Jesus started? Love one another.
Love is the highest law. He said, I'm not a big quoter of the Bible, but I vaguely recall it being something like it being the law above all other laws. Yes,
yeah, absolutely. Paul wrote about this in 1 Corinthians 13, which we often read at weddings, which makes me chuckle a little bit. Like faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love, highest of all. Exactly right.
Well, because with love, theoretically, you're not going to bonk anybody on the head and take their stuff.
In theory.
You're going to be fair to people.
Yeah.
You're going to treat people well with dignity and respect.
That's right.
We're going to cooperate. We're going to find a way to work together, even as you say, if we disagree.
That's it. We learn to listen more than we talk. When we love in marriage becomes a mutual submission, not this dominion of one over another. That's what it means to love one another. And it impacts every part of our lives. You can't wall off one part and say, well, not there. Really? Because Jesus didn't give any exception clauses.
That's true. It's a pretty simple law. Love one another. He didn't
I
say
mean,
love one another at home, but not at work.
he didn't. And as I read that in the original language, you know what it means in the original language?
Mm-mm.
It means love one another. That's what it means.
That's fabulous. So how does that inform you in business? Because you do business.
Mhm.
So how does that concept of love at the core inform the way that you coach, the way that you do business, the way that you work with people?
What I do these days is I pour into and invest in leaders to help them get better. I agree with what Craig Rochelle says, that when a leader gets better, everybody benefits. The people that they lead on their team, their company, their church, their organization, their spouse, their kids, their clients, their customers, everybody benefits just by a leader getting better. So that's where I pour my time and energy in. I want to help leaders get better. I coach them, I equip them, I help them to get better at leadership. Too often we throw leaders in and say, all right, so lead now. We don't have any training. We don't have any encouragement. There's no coach to help them. And too many of us learn to lead that way. And we found all of the ditches and all of the potholes and all of the ways not to do something. I want to help leaders avoid some of those. And so what I do is help them to intentionally grow in their leadership, in their influence, but also intentionally grow as a person beyond just what they do. That's where it starts. From there, it then extends down to thinking about the people that they lead. How do you see people as more than just a cog in the machine, more than just what they do? You begin to see them as an actual 3D human being. And you know what's at the core of that? You're learning how to love one another. Shh, don't tell anybody. But that goes back to Jesus.
Yeah. I think that's so amazing that you can kind of pull all that into kind of that business arena where in the United States, at least, I can't speak to other places, but in the US, we tend to want to compartmentalize our lives.
Oh, sure.
Our faith is on Sunday or whatever day of the week you deal with your faith,
Sure.
Maybe Wednesday and Sunday, maybe Saturday, whatever it is.
Sure.
Our home life is, this piece before 8 a.m. and after 7 p.m., right? Yeah. That kind of thing. And then work is its own thing. Yeah. So how do you find that leaders take what I want to say is your guidance, your understanding and your sharing on board, and how does that shift them in the way they operate in their businesses in their lives?
Michelle, I think it begins with understanding that there is a myth that is perpetuated in our culture, and it goes back to the ancient Greeks. And the idea is that we can compartmentalize our lives and we can wall off certain parts from certain other parts. We're coming up on Thanksgiving here in the U.S. in a few weeks from now as we record this. And one of my favorite parts about Thanksgiving is the plates that we use, because they have these little barriers between the dishes, right? They're the main kind of little wall, and then you have your side dish. Because I don't like my food to touch. I'm one of those people. Oh. I know it's all going to be together down here, but up here, I want to savor each flavor, right? Mm-hmm. And I love those plates, but too many of us think our lives are like those plates. And we have these little walls that we can separate. And this part's not going to touch what happens over here. And what happens at the office doesn't affect what happens at home, and vice versa. And that's a cute myth, that idea of compartmentalization. But it's just that. It's a myth. The fact is, we are created as unified people, as one. Every part touches every other part. And the idea that you can wall one part off and it has no influence on any other part is really just silly. The only way for that to happen is to have a complete lack of integrity. Integrity is where all the pieces touch and work together. And that's what we strive for. And this is what I strive for with my clients. I want to coach them in such a way that there is integrity in all parts of their life. So yeah, we tend to compartmentalize our faith, and we compartmentalize our work, and we compartmentalize our home. But the people that I lead, the team that I lead, I want to know what's going on in different parts of their life, because I want them to understand I see them as individual people, not just as what they do. I want them to understand that I care about what happens at home. I care about what happens in their life. As I do that, as I begin to value them and see them as people, what I find, and what the people that I coach find, is that those employees, those team members, they appreciate that. They appreciate being seen for more than just what they do. and they begin to lean in, and they bring more of themselves to what they do. They lean in and they work harder and they invest more. And that's not the motivation behind why we do it. We do it, well, because we love one another. But the fact of the matter is, there's a very pragmatic reason why this matters and why the American environment and culture could learn so much from this principle. If we see people as people and we value them, not just for what they do, but for who they are, and we invest in them and pour into them and try to help them to equip them to accomplish the dreams that they have, not just what we have for them to do, we see people more like Jesus does.
Well, and do you think then that people give more of themselves when they're in that type of environment because they see the leader giving more of themselves? I mean, is there some correlation there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because people are going to lead, people are going to follow where they're led, right? And if you don't like where people are going or how people are acting, you have to ask yourself as the leader the question, have I led them to do that? Have I led them to be that way? Or is this just what happens when I haven't led well? And this is the point of intentionality. And this is why intentionality is so important. You don't accidentally become a great leader. Nobody in the history of ever has woken up one day and said, oh, wow, I'm a great leader. I don't know how that happened. I didn't mean for that to happen, but here I am. It didn't happen that way. You have to be intentional about it. You have to be purposeful in your growth, in what you're surrounding yourself with and what you're bringing into your life, the inputs of your life. And you have to be intentional in what you're doing as the leader, pouring into those around you, helping them understand they are valued far beyond just what they do.
So what kinds of things do you find are issues for your leaders when they first come to you?
You know, this is one of the challenges of what I do. There's not a cookie cutter approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't just hand you 12 modules and say, here you go, just watch these. This will fix all your problems. So much of what I do is very customized around what each leader is struggling with. And I'm not sure I've ever had two that were the same exactly. There's some similar threads that run through them, to be sure, but each one is unique because they're going to struggle with something that's, well, inherent in their story. It comes from their background. It comes from who they are. For instance, one client was really wrestling around the idea of what's next. He was wrapping up one part of his story, wrapping up in the military, coming to the point of retirement, but then he's ready for the next piece. But what's next? There's 10, 15 different directions he could go. What now? He wants to take what's been invested in him and use it for the benefit of other people, but how? Where? And so we walked through that journey together, and that looked different for him than it did for another guy who is coming to the end of a very long run, right? Moving into retirement, but he wasn't done yet, right? What's the next chapter going to look like? Well, that was a whole different ballgame. He was a high-power C-suite leader, moving into retirement, but ready for the next chapter. It was going to look very, very different for him than it did for the first guy. You know, each one is unique. Each one is different. And what I want to do is help them to lean into their own personal story. I want to lean into their own wiring, I call it. Mm-hmm. But first, you have to understand your wiring. You have to discover it. Each one of us is wired uniquely. You know, and there are so many great assessments and tools that are helpful here, from the Myers-Briggs to the DISC. One that I'm using these days with teams is called the Working Genius from Patrick Lencioni's Table Group. Fantastic tool to help you understand what you bring to the table. What is your area of passion, your area of working genius? What are your areas of working competency? You can do them, but they're not your favorite. And what are your areas of working frustration? Those areas that drain you. And if you have to do those things long term, your batteries are going to be so low, you're not going to be any good to anybody. I want to help people understand their wiring. I want to help leaders understand that, because when they understand their wiring, they can lean in to their areas of genius. But not just that, they can begin to understand how the people they lead are wired, so they can help lift them up and help them move into a place where they're operating out of their areas of genius too, because that's what it really means to lead well.
So, and it sounds like that would also help them with building the best possible team.
Yes.
Because if, let's say, your genius is marketing and someone else's genius is the finance and someone else, and I'm using broad terms.
Sure.
It gets more specific than that. But you can then say, oh, we've got gaps in these areas. Let's find people who want to fill that role and they can live their best lives.
Absolutely. And that's what we want, isn't it? We want everybody to be living the best version of themselves. We want them to be designing that so that they go home, well, fulfilled. And they don't dread coming back to work. They don't dread like, oh, I got to go back there. The Sunday night blues, right? I got to go back tomorrow. I don't want that for them. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for any of the leaders that I work with.
That's awesome. So let's say you've got a leader. They're transitioning from corporate and they're like, okay, what do I do next? What are 2 or 3 things that you would advise them to do or books to read to help them start getting on track?
Depending on where they are, a book that I've found incredibly helpful is Bob Buford's Halftime, which talks about transition, right? From one career to the second part of your life. What is that going to look like? Are you going to be intentional in how you craft and create that? I think the working genius profile is incredibly helpful for understanding what your areas of greatest contribution are. And I think that's got to be part of the conversation, because you need to understand, hey, if one of my areas of genius is wonder, and I'm all about thinking about things that have never been and ideation and thinking about great new ideas, you probably should not be an accountant. Right? That's probably not going to be what fulfills, maybe some really crazy, cool accounting that I'm not aware of that they could lean into. Fantastic. But you need to understand how you're wired before you start plotting and planning your next step. Otherwise, you could find yourself in a terrible mismatch.
Wow, that's awesome. So, Dr. William, how can people connect with you so that they can learn more and hopefully grow in that loving leadership? Is that okay if I call it that? Loving
Absolutely.
leadership?
Go for it. Absolutely. You can go to catalyticleadership.net. That's the site, the hub of what I do. You can find out more about the coaching that I do. You can follow the podcast that I just started a few months ago, where I interview different catalytic leaders in their fields and share some of the things that I've learned as I've coached leaders now for over 20 years. And for your listeners, I'd love to offer also a free copy of the book I published earlier this year. If they go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, they can get a free copy of the book. If they're willing to pay shipping to help me get it to them, we'll put a copy in their hands. It captures a lot of the principles that I've learned coaching leaders now for a couple decades to help leaders get better. I want to put this into the hands of as many leaders as I can so that, whether I'm going to coach them one-on-one or not, they can benefit from so much of what has been learned by the leaders that I've worked with and from my own story.
Well, I think that's amazing. Everybody run out, get the book. We need, and here's the thing, you and I have talked about this briefly. A lot of times people who write books, which is a lot of my audience, don't realize they're starting businesses. When you start a business, you are a leader.
Yes.
And you need to learn to lead well. So Go out, get the book. Dr. William Attaway, thank you so much for appearing on Somewhere in the Middle with Michelle Berard.
It has been such an honor, Michelle. I've so enjoyed the conversation.
Well, that's our show this month, guys. You can reach me online at michelleberard.com. That's MICHELEBARARD.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as Urban Book Editor. Feel free to send in some topics you'd like us to cover on the show. I'd love to hear from you. Make sure you tune in to the show on June 16th, when my guest will be the founder of Getting Black Women Paid, Teen Zekas. You can find us once a month on Fridays at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern Time at the somewhereinthemiddlepodcast.com. Let's continue the conversation. You guys be good, stay mindful, and remain prayerful. Peace and blessings, y'all.